The following is a production of Cary TV, the Town of Cary's government access channel. We will call to order our August 19th meeting of the Cary Planning and Zoning Board. We will begin tonight by approving our agenda. Do we have any adjustments to the agenda? If not, do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
We have a motion.
Second.
Do we have a second? Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Next, we need to approve a couple sets of minutes from our previous meetings. First of all, the July 15th regular meeting minutes. Any changes? Hearing none, could we have a motion to approve?
Move to approve the regular meeting minutes from July 15th.
Second.
We have a motion, a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then finally, we need to approve our minutes from our July 22nd work session. Adjustments? If none, motion to approve? Someone?
So moved.
We have a motion, second?
Second.
A motion, second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And with that, we're going to move right into our first public hearing. And before we start that, just review some of the procedures for our public hearing. We are going to begin with a presentation from a member of our staff that will present the basic facts of the case, following which I'm going to open the public hearing. The first speaker at the public hearing will be the applicant, who will have 10 minutes to address us on details of their proposal. Following that, I'm going to open the public hearing to other comments from anyone present. We ask that you approach the podium from this stairway over on my right, your left. Please give the clerk a comment card, an identification card, and you will have 4.5 minutes on that little black box in the timer there before a green light is going to turn yellow. When it turns yellow, that means you've got 30 seconds left. At 5 minutes, it's going to turn red. And to be fair, I'm going to have to cut you off at that point. We ask you to be concise. If you have multiple people addressing the same issue, please pick a spokesman. And be aware of the fact that you need to be addressing all of the members of the board. We will probably not interact with you. And that said, I think I'm going to open this case, and we'll hear the staff presentation from Ms. Crichton.
Thank you. Good evening. For your consideration is a request made by property owners Ann B. Mills and Carol M. Patterson to rezone approximately 16.78 acres located at Carpenter Upchurch Road and Lewis Stevens Road. The request is to rezone the property from residential 40 to residential multifamily conditional use. Bear with me 1 second here. The subject property is highlighted here in yellow. It's located south of Green Hope High School and south of the Cary Tennis Park. And just north of those two properties is the Heritage Pines residential community. Green Hope Elementary School is east of the subject property, and the land to the south and the west is zoned R40 and is used primarily for agricultural activity. Here's a close-up view of the subject property. It's comprised of 3 separate parcels. One of the parcels is located landlocked within a larger parcel here, and then there's a smaller half-acre parcel adjacent to Lewis Stevens Drive. Cary's land use plan designation is for low to medium density residential on the subject property. The small half-acre parcel over here along Lewis Stevens Drive was a residual piece of this larger parcel when the road was widened. And as you'll see in the staff report, it was anticipated that it would be the residential use of the 2 adjacent properties. The existing zoning is residential 40. And as I stated, the applicant is requesting residential multifamily conditional use. The proposed conditions would limit the density to 8 dwelling units per acre and limit the permitted uses to townhomes, semi-detached or attached dwellings, public athletic fields, neighborhood recreation centers, and parks, either public or private. Property owners within 400 feet of the subject property were notified by first-class mail. The property was advertised and posted. And there were no protest petitions. Staff did receive a few phone calls from adjacent property owners. One citizen expressed the need for road improvements along Lewis Stevens Drive. Citizens to the south of the subject property expressed concern about buffering between uses, and one citizen called and asked for attention to be given to the need for tennis park expansion. The applicant, in response to some of the concerns of adjacent property owners, proposed additional conditions at the Town Council public hearing and offered that a minimum of 50% of townhomes on the property be constructed with 2-car garages and the balance with 1-car garages, and that there be a 40-foot type A opaque buffer along the southern property line. And this is an illustration that shows, highlighted in green, approximately 40 feet onto the subject property. The site is impacted in the central area with stream buffers according to Cary's GIS maps, and field determination would be required at the time of site plan review. According to Cary's Parks, Recreational Cultural Resources Master Plan, this map shows the location of existing and proposed greenway trails and proposed street side trails. And as I mentioned, the Cary Tennis Park is located just to the north. There is consideration taking place right now for acquiring land in that area for future expansion of the tennis park. Cary's transportation plan identifies Carpenter Upchurch Road as a major thoroughfare and Lewis Stevens as a major collector. There is a C-Tran fixed route approximately a mile south of the subject property on High House Road, and then a TTA route along NC 55. This concludes staff's presentation. Following the public hearing, both the applicant and staff will be available for your questions.
Thank you. At this point, I'm going to open the public hearing, and we will begin with a presentation from the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Board. My name is Glenda Topp with Glenda S. Topp & Associates, and I'm here tonight representing the property owners, Mrs. Mills and Ms. Patterson, who are longtime residents of the property in Cary. The requested zoning classification is RMF 8. The maximum density with this zoning classification is 8 units per acre. We are in compliance with the land use plan, as was pointed out by staff. The plan shows the western 2/3 of the site as medium density and the remaining portion being low to medium density. And we have limited the uses to townhomes, attached units, and the ability to have a public athletic field, neighborhood recreation center, and a public or private park. We believe that the proposed land use and density is appropriate for the site based on the existing land uses that we are adjacent to. To the north is the high school and the Cary Tennis Park. Also to the east is Green Hope Elementary School and Lewis Stevens Road. To the west, we are bounded by Carpenter Upchurch Road, and to the south is R40, and that property has the same land use designation as the Mills Patterson property. We did have discussions with the property owners to the south. There was some concern raised about the buffer that we would be providing, and also there were discussions about the townhome use, or what the townhomes might look like, or what they might provide. So we did add a condition that all units would have a garage and that no less than 50% would have a two-car garage. And we also provided, as shown on the slide, that there would be a 40-foot type A buffer along the southern property line, and that buffer, being a type A, is opaque. As you saw from the map, the site is affected by several stream buffers. Out of the approximately 16.73 acres, there's approximately 4.8 acres in the Neuse buffer and 2.8 acres in the perimeter buffer. And this is for a total of approximately 7.6 acres, which makes up around 46% of the site. And of course, this acreage does not include any additional open space that might be provided as we develop, or as the site plan is developed, and again does not include the BMP for the site. The proposed density, we feel, again, is appropriate given the amount of the site that cannot be built upon. We do feel that's an important part of why we have proposed the uses that we have, and also the density. As staff pointed out, there was not a protest petition. No one spoke out at the public hearing. Mrs. Mills is here tonight. Speaking on her behalf, she wants the board to know that the family has lived on the property since the 1970s. They have watched development occur around them for the past 4 decades. The area has changed quite a bit since they have moved there, and they feel that the time is right now for them to move. Wanted to also add that they are staying in Cary and are hoping to move to Searstone. And like I said, Mrs. Mills is in the property tonight. Also want to point out that the property owner, the developer is here, JPM South, and if there are any questions for him, he would be happy to answer any questions, as myself and also the engineers for the project are also here tonight. On behalf of the property owners, I ask for the board's support in recommending approval of the proposed rezoning, and again, we're happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we'll open the public hearing to other speakers. Would anyone like to address us? Anyone? Seeing no one approach the podium, I'm going to close the public hearing and open this case for questions from the board. Mr. Warren.
One question for the petitioner, Glenda. In the event the city makes a bid for part of that property for expansion of the tennis center, how will that, have you even done the calculation of how that will affect the density of the remaining land?
It's 8 units.
I just want to make sure we clarify the question, and if the applicant would like to speak, I'd like to invite him to come on down.
Okay.
But the density cap for 8 dwelling units per acre would remain across the entire, across that parcel,
Right.
the residual parcel, if it's not the entire property. Does that answer your question? Just.
Did you get your question answered?
Yes, because I was made aware of the fact that the city does have an interest, potential interest in the property, and depending on how much acreage is used for that expansion, I was just curious if they had to readjust their density. based upon not only that, but, the severe stream buffers that they have to deal with, et cetera.
So
If-
did you get the answer
Yes.
you're looking for? Okay.
Okay.
Okay. What I was going to add is, if that was to happen, the constraints of the site on the portion that would be left would still be there. The density would be 8 units per acre. And the number of units that would go on there would be dependent upon what the stream buffers, the required buffers, streetscape, and then, go from there. But the 8 units per acre would be applicable on that part that the developer would remain, that he would be remaining, the remaining
Okay.
part of it.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. I just want to understand, what is the land use plan for this property? It was mentioned that 2/3 is MDR and
The notes on the land use plan say it's low to medium, so
low to medium for all of this property or just 2/3?
it's, pardon me, I'm sorry. I'd hear somebody talking, but I didn't know who was speaking, sorry.
I just want to know the land use plan for the property.
If
Right
you'll look
now.
if you'll look in your staff report
Right.
on page 4, it explains that the land use plan recommendation adopted in 1996 recommends that the western 2/3 of the tract be developed as medium-density residential, and that most of the eastern third of the tract be developed anywhere in the range of low to medium-density residential. So there's the note, the LDR to MDR on the plan, and then the explanation about that little residual piece with the O&I zoning designation, or not O&I zoning, but the land use plan designation for office.
And the land use designation for the property to the south of this proposed property is MDR or?
It's also split. It's also got a range showing on
MDR and
it.
LDR.
You can see that here. This is to the south of it. This is all one tract in here that's also got the split designation on it.
Thank you.
Other questions? This is a question that probably isn't applicable at this point, but I'm curious. If indeed the tennis center did expand southward into the eastern part of this parcel, how would you get road access to the remaining parts of the parcel?
Well, that would be something that would have to be addressed at the site plan. That's true.
Yeah, and I appreciate site plan issues usually aren't applicable, but since we have this stipulation that says it can be parks, or basically there's an expectation here that it could be a tennis center. If indeed that happened, you got to start wondering, well, how does this zoning sort out then?
The question about access, we have looked at this, and the expansion of the tennis park is part of our master plan. And because we have pedestrian access and connection within the park itself, we could have definitely pedestrian access directly. We're looking at the eastern half of the property at this point. So there is access that way. If we're needing access, there's stream buffers from Lewis Stevens that we would obviously have to cross, but that's one possible access point.
Is your question access to a future tennis center site or future development opportunities on the property?
Future development opportunities
Was it-
on the property.
Yeah.
Two things I have in mind. We will hear a case next month about a large development that was put in place with only one access road. If you put a tennis center on the
So-
east side of this parcel, then the only way you're going to get out of this parcel is to the west with one access road, which sounds to me like something we ought to try to avoid.
In preliminary, well, we have shown a plan to staff if in fact the tennis courts or the tennis center does expand. The plan shows access out on Carpenter Upchurch Road, and again, I can't speak for engineering, but the number of units that would be envisioned on that part, I don't think would create an issue where there'd be 2 points of access. But again, I think, and I know Mr. Jensen is here, but that's something that would be worked out and discussed, as we go through the process, if in fact there's, the town, does buy the property, we would have to comply with the town standards on that side of the property that we develop, because at zoning we've got to meet or exceed what the requirements are, so we would have to follow town of Cary standards for access if in fact that happens.
And I would like to add that connectivity to the south would be a requirement.
Right, and we'll have to provide a stub to the south. And just as a note, in talking with Mr. Upchurch to the south, he's very aware of what we're doing, and again, not speaking for him, has similar interest, potentially of developing his property, in the future. So we would be stubbing in order for, there to be connectivity out that way.
That makes me feel better. Yeah, I'm just thinking of
No, I know what you're saying.
the other situation that we're struggling with is a classic example of what you want to try to avoid.
Right.
And I just want to make sure we weren't going there
Ms.
again.
Brannon made a good point about the connectivity to the south.
Excellent. Other questions? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion that we forward 13 REZ 07 to council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans, and is in the public interest for the reasons set forth in staff report and presentation.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and second discussion.
Yeah, I'll comment briefly that the density requested is at the higher end of what the land use plan allows, and typically that is something I think twice about, looking at this property with the challenges it has from shape and topography and stream buffers, and the fact that they have even accommodated all of the requests from neighboring property owners, including the town and the neighboring property owners to the south with the garages and so on. I think that is a reasonable accommodation to be able to have that density and give them some flexibility, since they've offered some flexibility with the conditions of the zoning. So I'll support the motion.
Excellent. Other comments? Mr. Costello.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that in the interest of kind of my thought on this is I'll be supporting the motion. I think it's a proper transition from the use to the north. Low and medium residential, if that's still to the south, we still have a proper transition from the school complex and the tennis to the townhomes to maybe single-family residential down below. I do like the concessions and design, 2-car, 50% 2-car, the 40-foot opaque buffer. So I think this is a very appropriate zoning designation, and I'll support it.
Other comments? In that case, I'm going to call a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. And then we're going to move on to our next case, which is a case without a public hearing. And this is going back and looking at LDO amendments round 25, and we just have two items, B2 and 3, or B and C, B2 and C2, correct?
Yes, that's correct. You have two items from round 25 that the board considered at its May 23rd meeting and then referred to a work session for further discussion. These items were discussed at your July work session, and they returned this evening for a potential recommendation to council. The first item is B2. It's a proposed amendment regarding the replacement of champion trees. The town's land development ordinance's current provisions provide specific options that do not always produce results that are proportional to the size of the champion tree being removed. For example, a 45-inch caliper champion tree could be currently replaced with only 30 inches of total caliper of new tree. In addition, any champion loblolly pine could be replaced with a single pine tree that is 10 feet tall or taller in height. The proposed amendment would change the regulations such that when a champion tree is removed, the total caliper inches of the replacement trees would equal or exceed the diameter of the tree being removed. The board's previous discussion primarily focused on the size of the replacement trees. Although the existing regulations required a minimum of a 2.5-inch caliper replacement tree, the proposed amendment before you this evening does not include a minimum size caliper replacement tree, meaning that the town's standard minimum of 2 inches in caliper would prevail. While staff believes that this variation and flexibility is acceptable, we also believe that it would be appropriate if the board would like to retain the slightly larger 2.5-inch minimum caliper size in this particular case, as currently included in the ordinance. The second item, C2, would allow beekeeping to occur as an accessory use in conjunction with a community garden or an HOA common area in zoning districts where beekeeping is currently allowed as a principal use. This accessory use would be permitted with the property owner's permission and the participation of a qualified beekeeper to take responsibility for the maintenance care of the hives. As discussed during the board's previous meetings, a qualified beekeeper would simply be someone who's a registered member of a local or state beekeeping organization and has documented training. Specific classes are not identified to provide maximum flexibility regarding what can be accepted by staff. At this time, I'd be glad to answer any questions. We are recommending approval of these two items at this time.
Questions?
I just have a question. Did you say the replacement tree in the new amendment will be 2 inches or 2.5 inches?
The minimum as proposed would be 2 inches.
2 inches, okay.
But I believe I heard you say if we wanted to bring you back up to 2.5, you're not going to
be okay.
be too angry with us.
Oh, yeah, we talked quite a bit at the work session. As you get larger caliper trees, there's an increased risk of mortality, but we don't believe the difference between 2 and 2.5 inches in caliper is significant. So it's, while the flexibility, there are instances on small sites, as trees are being replaced, you have to have 30 feet between each replacement tree that would be planted. So there are times when trees need to be upsized just to fit replacement trees on a small site. We don't believe that the 2.5-inch, retaining the 2.5-inch caliper size would be a problem.
And I understood from your report that 2 inches trees will grow faster and much better than a larger diameter trees. Is that correct?
Small trees do adapt faster. They regenerate their root systems quicker, and that translates into higher survival rates and lower maintenance costs during the establishment period. Obviously, a larger tree that needs longer to establish is going to probably be more exposed to drought, disease, and things. So there's, as you move up into the 4, 5, and 6-inch caliper range, the increased chance of mortality goes up quite a bit. But as you move around in the 2, 2.5-inch, 3-inch caliper range, usually have pretty good margins of success.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller, you had some concerns about this prior to the work session. Are you comfortable now?
I had a very good conversation with Mr. Wilson and Mr. Hales, who's one of the town certified arborists, going over this, and we had all sort of reviewed scholarly literature that was out there, and portions of it are inconclusive, but I think what this does is add the flexibility, as Mr. Wilson said, that today it's, you know, it's kind of small or large, and you may not get the full caliper inches back of the tree that you replaced. I think this gives you the flexibility, as you said, to use the larger trees, which there is some evidence that says, you know, can grow with the right care. If you have the room to do that, or you don't have the room on your lot to do that, you can replace it with larger trees. If you have more room, you can have more flexibility. So I think overall the answer is, yes, I am satisfied with it. I would like to, perhaps, you know, this is a separate issue, but kind of at the root of this is, you know, is there a better way to prevent losing champion trees in the first place? But that's sort of not part of this amendment, but a question that, you know, perhaps staff or someone could look into at the appropriate
Good
time.
conversation for a future discussion.
But in terms of this, you know, if there aren't questions, I'd be happy to make a motion on this since I was the one. But
Well, let's see if we have
Yeah.
other questions here first.
Well, I do actually, I would like to kind of broaden what Brent was talking about and just kind of put all this in context. I'd like to understand a little better. This is, okay, if you're replacing the tree, but can you just provide a little bit of background for me, I guess, on, you know, when a site plan is coming to staff and you've got a beautiful champion tree at a McDonald's or along Maynard Road, you know, those have been noted, and people are fairly disturbed. I'm disturbed by them, seeing these beautiful trees that have come down. So this is great for replacement, but just if I could have a little more background about what restrictions or limitations or guidelines there are so that those aren't even coming out in the first place.
And to make sure, I think this is the second issue that Mr. Miller was mentioning. And so to talk a little about that, because the amendment that is before you this evening is really just to make the total caliper inches that are being planted back commensurate with what's being taken out. This is an interesting question, separate issue. Currently, the planning director's approval is required to remove a champion tree. There is some language in the ordinance that talks about, the council's goals and objectives for preserving trees, but there is flexibility where trees need to be removed for champion trees to be removed. And it's a balance. Obviously, if you wanted to preserve all champion trees, you can have very, very strict rules in that regard, but then you limit new development, you limit redevelopment. The McDonald's site, for example, I think you're referring to on Walnut Street, with those two large trees that had grown in the parking lot over time and become champion trees, without the ability to remove those, that redevelopment would not have occurred. Perhaps the site was better as it was, but we currently have the flexibility built into the ordinance to accommodate that type of redevelopment and then come back in with larger trees. So what they've done on that site is they originally came in and said, oh, we'll put a replacement tree every 10 feet on the back of the property next to H.H. Gregg. Well, you can't do that. These trees have to be at least 30 feet from any other tree. So what they've ended up doing is upsizing those replacement trees, and then they've regained because it's such a small site, they've picked up the other caliper inches they've needed by upsizing other trees that would normally have just been 2 inches in caliper on the site. So what you end up with will be larger trees than you would have had, more trees than you would have had. Arguably, if you look in terms of canopy, instead of the two large canopy in that case, over time you'll have new trees grow and have multiple tree canopies. Just explaining, not necessarily saying that's a good choice or a bad choice, but it is how redevelopment can occur on certain sites, so it is something to think about. If the planning and zoning board would like for us to, it's certainly something we can include in a future round of amendments with some ideas as to how you might look to tweak that if they're, because some sites that are small, we had a church that came in recently and wanted to add a large playfield on the site, and they needed to go into a wooded area to do it, and there was a champion tree located. When you preserve a champion tree, the ordinance requires that you save 1 1/4 feet for every inch of caliper. So if you have a 30-inch caliper tree, that means you're going to need close to a 40-foot radius around the tree. Well, by the time you put that constraint on a site plan, you suddenly don't have so much area to develop in, and the field, this is an area that's undisturbed around the tree to preserve the champion tree, and so sometimes it'll render expansion on a site undoable. So those are things that need to be weighed as part of that discussion, and if the Planning and Zoning Board would like for us to, we can certainly bring that topic back.
I think it's a discussion worth having.
I agree.
All right.
Do we have other questions? How about on beekeeping? For anyone who might be watching at home, we did have a fairly extensive work session on both of these topics. It's not that we haven't been engaged, it's just we spent several hours talking about them. If not, can I get a motion, perhaps, do we have a motion for both items?
I'll make the motion for the first one, just in case people have a different point of view. Perhaps not. Maybe it'll take us an extra minute if it does. I move that we forward LDO Amendment Round 25, Item B2, Champion Trees to Town Council with a recommendation for approval. It is consistent with the comprehensive plan and other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation. The recommendation to include maintaining the 2.5-inch caliper inch minimum that exists today rather than the 2-inch that was originally proposed.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? In that case, I'm going to call it a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, that motion carries 7-0. And now can we talk about C2, the beekeeping place? Does someone have a motion? Hearing no questions, I see no, again, we've been through this one, spent over an hour on it. Can someone give us a motion, please?
I will make a motion. I move that board forward LDO amendment number
Around 25.
25, C2, to town council with the recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest to the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I will second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. That motion, I believe, carries 7-0.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm a no, you didn't ask
I
for the-
apologize. I apologize. I thought I saw your hand going. Okay, so that motion carries 6-1. And would you like to say why it is that you oppose, so we can give a little bit of input?
Yeah, I mean, at the work session and also in our previous meeting, I just find the addition of a qualification for beekeeping to be ambiguous and unnecessary, given that bees and humans have worked together for hundreds of years, so.
Thank you.
And just before we leave that, there was the question of this idea of looking into sort of preserving the champion. Is that something the staff needs a motion for, or that?
It'd be helpful for the record if you just, I think, a motion asking the staff to take a look at the criteria associated with.
Just since this particular thing was not on the agenda, can we just plug it in here?
I'll make a motion that we recommend to town council that they direct staff to look into alternatives to the current ordinance for preserving champion trees.
I will second that.
Is that clear enough?
Yep.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 7-0.
Thank you.
In closing, I know that the board has spent a lot of time with the beekeeping issue. I just thought I would share something that's coming together from the original amendment regarding beekeeping. The Wake County Beekeepers has tentatively scheduled a class, beekeeping meeting it's a meeting on being a good neighbor. And they've tentatively scheduled it for October the 9th at the Bond Park Community Center. I believe it's from 7 to 10. So if that's something that interests anyone, just wanted to let you know that is an example of the type of class that the staff would, consider appropriate if the amendment moves forward and gets adopted as proposed.
Excellent. Thank you. So now I think we go to LDO amendments round 26.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. What you have before you is another round of land development ordinance amendments. These amendments cover a variety of topics, including changes to the sign ordinance, outdoor display of sales and goods, sunrooms and screen porches, setbacks from telecommunication facilities, severe pruning regulations, group homes, mixed-use development standards, and the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And I'll review those with you. With regard to the logos, there's with the sign ordinance changes, there are certain sections that are being changed. One, dealing with logos, ground signs, increasing the height of ground signs, allowing more ground signs than we have today, increasing the size of wall signs, and increasing the size of suspended signs, as well as some other changes such as increasing the size of neon signs. As you may know, some businesses want to put logos on their signs for identification of their business. Today, we're proposing a town-wide change to increase logo size from 20% of the allowable signage to up to 30%, provided that the logo that's put in has no internal illumination, it's three-dimensional in design, it's either carved or simulated wood or stone or metal, and no high-intensity colors. And in certain circumstances, that those logos can go up to 75% of the allowable sign area. And that's when you have a monument sign or you have wall signs where the buildings have architectural distinct segments with our new building design standards that went in place in 2006. A lot of the buildings built after 2006 or renovated after 2006 would have distinct architectural segments in buildings that would be able to use this provision. This is an example that you would see typically of the 20% of the allowable sign area with the illuminated logo sign. This would be a logo if the ordinance was approved. If people wanted to increase the size of the logo above the 20%, this could be an example of what would meet that criteria. There's several changes to our ground sign regulations. Principal ground signs, we're recommending to increase 1 foot from 3.5 to 4.5 feet in height. And I'll get into a minute why we're recommending that. We're also allowing ground signs for shopping center out parcels. Today, out parcels in shopping centers are not allowed individual ground signs. However, we would restrict that to 42 inches in height and only 16 square feet in size. We're also expanding the ability for these multi-tenant areas, centers to have principal ground signs at every principal entrance, provided they're at least 300 feet apart. And all this is designed to kind of help increase visibility within these more shopping centers or multi-tenant sites. This is our current standard examples of current ground signs, 3.5 feet high, 32 square feet. And as you can see, our ground signs require architectural compatibility with the building. So from an aesthetic standpoint, our ground signs meet the quality standards that Cary has. However, we've noticed that the conflict between the height of the ground sign and the landscaping, and we're also getting a lot of long signs, and we feel like by increasing the height, we probably would help improve the visibility of text placed on the sign, but also give an opportunity to have the text up higher off the ground, and maybe the sign shapes would be more square and less long. So here's some more examples of the readability of signs when they go, the text goes all the way to the ground. It's hard sometimes to read those signs. So we're recommending that, like I said, principal ground signs to go up higher. We would maintain the 32 square foot area of the sign. We'd maintain the architectural compatibility. We'd also allow for landscaping for these taller signs if they went in. But we also provide a provision that the landscaping doesn't have to be in front of the sign. It can be off to the side so that people don't let the landscape go up and block the sign. The next thing, right now our current standards, ground signs are only allowed on just out parcels that are not part of shopping centers. And this is an example, and these are other examples. So it's kind of treating out parcels differently based on the location of them. And we believe from a staff standpoint, there's several reasons we would recommend you consider changing our regulations for ground signs to allow shopping center out parcels to have signs. One, the mature landscaping within our streetscapes are really blocking a lot of the wall signs, and they seem to increase the amount of severe pruning that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a lot of that where people might understand that there might have some consequences by pruning trees, but they'd rather you go ahead and cut trees and provide more visibility for them. So having a ground sign might help prevent that in the future and save some of the trees. We also feel like it makes sense from a reasonable standpoint. If other out parcels can have signs, why can't these out parcels have signs? As you can see, this is some of the examples. Even in the wintertime, signs are obscured by the landscaping. So our landscape has been successful, but it is a concern potentially from the public trying to find what's behind the signs, behind the landscaping. So as you can see, this is our proposed regulations, smaller in nature, these out parcel signs, because the regular square footage is 32 square feet. These would be limited to 16 square feet, so there wouldn't be a lot of big signs along these out parcels. But they would still have the architecture compatibility, so they'd all be somewhat consistent and wouldn't potentially cause some aesthetic issues. But I know at the work session there were some concerns about that. So we went out to Crossroads because there's mention about a lot of out parcels along Walnut Street. And this is kind of the current conditions with these different out parcels. You can't see it right here, but there's Chick-fil-A right over here, Olive Garden, Red Lobster. And so, and this kind of, shows the kind of the height of the 42 inches. So we kind of dropped some signs in there just to kind of visually show you what it might look like along that corridor. I know it's kind of hard to see, but if you're kind of driving by, there would be some kind of consistency with the material. Colors would be could be a little bit different, but you kind of get the picture of potentially how it would look. Hopefully that addresses some of your concerns. Moving on to monument signs, our current regulations are monument signs can be no longer taller than 12 feet in height. They have to be built of 75% masonry material, 32 square foot limit on the sign area, 10-foot setback from roadways, and are required for every square foot of sign they have 1 square feet of landscaping. These are only allowed in certain areas, residential subdivision entries, non-residential centers, and non-residential developments, and individual non-residential parcels that are greater than 15 acres. So the 12 feet in height, those centers that qualify, areas that qualify, up to 130,000 square feet of building square footage on site. That's the current regulation. The proposed regulation, if your center has, excluding out parcel square footage, has 130,000 square feet of building area, then you can go up to 16 feet and also increase the amount up to 50 square feet of sign area. We have received a request from a new tenant that's coming to town, that they want to potentially put a piece of art on top of a monument sign. And the ordinance right now potentially could allow that, but it can't be higher than the requirement of 16 feet. And so one of the options, if you all want to consider this request from this applicant, is you can say that you could have artwork as long as it's less than 25% of the height of the monument, and the artwork is a component of a larger piece of artwork. So they can't just have that; they have to have something nearby it that integrates with the thing. So that's something to consider later on in your discussion. The next segment is dealing with wall signs, and staff is recommending increasing the amount of wall signs depending on the type of buildings. For all commercial buildings, including single tenants and businesses in the town center, most of those, the square footage today is like 1.25, and this would increase it across the board to 1.5 square feet per linear foot of frontage. And that's kind of how sign area is calculated. You take the linear frontage of the building and times it by this multiplier and get your square footage of allowable signs. And that's up to the tenant, where they put them on the building. Then with buildings in general shopping centers, with architectural distinct segments, we would allow that to go up to 2 square feet per linear foot frontage. And for individual retail tenants that are 100,000 square feet or greater and have architecturally distinct segments, they can go up to 3 square feet per linear foot of frontage. And I've got some kind of examples here. We, as the staff, kind of looked at existing signs, and as you can see, these signs are, from a distance, kind of hard to read, but they're pretty easy to read if you're up close to it. But we feel like that, signs could go up in size without jeopardizing the aesthetics of our community. This is a 2 square foot per linear frontage sign. At one time, a while back, there was provision to allow 2 square feet per linear frontage. And so some signs that exist today out in the town do have that type of standard. And this is one of them, as well as the Marshalls out at Crossroads. So kind of want to give you some examples visually of what that looks like. This would be for just a tenant that doesn't have architectural distinct segments or doesn't really meet the architectural standards, then it's 1.5. But if you had something that was 100,000 square feet or greater that had distinct segments, their signage would increase to 3 times. And so that way they have opportunities to kind of spread that out across the building. This is kind of looking at visually what that increase would look like. So this is 1.5 on this large building of 325 linear feet. Then going up to 2 times, the pink kind of shows the increase there. And then 3 times kind of visually shows you. So, from a staff standpoint, on a large building, you say, well, 3 times, that's a lot of signage. But on a large building spread out with multiple signs, we feel like that it's not a big leap to allow that increase in signage. And so we would recommend these increases for your consideration. Other changes involve suspended signs. We recommend increasing that from 2 to 4 square feet. We also recommend neon signs increase from 2 to 4 square feet in size. And public art, we've expanded the definition to prohibit display of signage on public art. However, signage may be put on support structures for art features, and I'll get into that in just a minute. I know that was an issue at the work session, and we can kind of discuss that. This is the definition, kind of the standards we put in if you're going to have signage on a base to, like you're going to put a base for a public art feature. You could have signage on that base, provided that it's consistent with the public art and support base was approved by the Art Advisory Committee, but no signage is located on the actual artwork itself. It would just be on the base, and the base doesn't exceed 42 inches in height, and it's not exceed the square footage limitation of 32, and the colors comply with the LDO. So that's something to hopefully address some of the concerns from the work session, and that can be talked about later as well. These are examples of suspended signs that would just be recommending increasing it to 4 square feet. And there's standards that none of them can be internally illuminated, so they're aesthetically pleasing signs. This is our current standard. We allow 1 neon sign, a maximum of 2 square feet in area, only in the town center and the mixed-use overlay district. So proposal is to increase it to 4 square feet and allow a maximum of up to 3 signs, 1 per side, up to 3 sides. And I guess what we felt like if you had windows on all 3 sides, that you wouldn't be potentially able to see 2 signs at the same time. So we were okay with that. We had talked in the work session, there was some concerns, well, what about other illuminated signs? Well, today, other illuminated signs like this 1-hour photo would not be allowed in our current ordinance. And so there was some discussion at the work session that, that there might be some members that would entertain, allowing those types of signs. So if the board wanted to do that, an option for you would be allow one illuminated sign, no more than 4 square feet on up to 3 sides. And so we wouldn't kind of classify it as neon or whatever. It could be just any illuminated sign as long as it's only 4 square feet. So that's up to you all if you want to entertain that. Also, staff would like you to entertain allowing these window signs town-wide, because right now we've noticed that there's been a lot of businesses that are not in overlay districts that have these signs. And so, it's up to you all if you feel like that you still want to keep that limit. Well, we feel like if it's a commercial business, it could be difficult for staff to say, hey, you're not in that overlay and you're going to have to remove yours, whereas somebody just down the street can have them. So it's challenging, but if that's something you want to continue, that's fine with staff. We just wanted to throw that out there as an opportunity if you want to consider doing that. Okay, moving to flags and flagpoles. We've got a couple of situations in towns where we have some buildings with flags on it, and we also have a request from a person, a tenant that wants to put a flag on the roof of a building. And so we're proposing that you can allow up to 2 flags on the roof of a non-residential building where the building is at least 3 stories in height, or the tenant space is 100,000 square feet or greater, and the building is at least 300 feet away from a thoroughfare. And some of the reasons why we put that distance from the thoroughfare and limit it to 100,000 square feet is to kind of reduce the number, but we also felt like if it's that far away from a thoroughfare, it's not acting as a sign. It's more just kind of a patriotic type thing. The maximum flagpole height above the roof line would be 25 feet, and the size would go up to 8 by 12. This is kind of an example of what a flag might look like at the street. If you're an out parcel in a shopping center, this is the look at the flag. But if you're quite some ways from a street, the flag from a driver by, it looks almost the same size, just a little bit bigger. So that's kind of a perspective if you want to consider allowing flags on it that because of the distance setback, it might not look as large, even though it's a larger sign on top of a roof, a larger flag on top of the roof. We've also received a request to allow outdoor display and sales to occur on the side of a retail building. Right now, you can only allow outdoor display on the fronts of buildings where the entrance is. And so we feel like with some adequate standards that putting it on the side would be appropriate as well. And provided it's 300 feet from a thoroughfare, we didn't want, because some buildings, the sides, right on top of the road, and we kind of want it, if you're going to have it on the side, to kind of make sure the building was further away from a thoroughfare, so it's from an appearance standpoint. Moving to regulations dealing with sunrooms and screened porches, we've run into some concerns that once people put roofs on decks or porches, it actually acts more like a part of the structure, and it also leads to potentially people trying to enclose those. And so we feel like that once you start putting a roof on a porch, that it needs to meet the building setbacks. You shouldn't be allowed to encroach into the required setbacks. And so we're kind of changing the language so that it's clear that if you're going to have a screened porch or something with a roof on it, that it doesn't encroach into those building setbacks. Telecommunication facilities. We've run into some situations where new residential lots are being built adjacent to existing towers. And we've looked at that and felt like that, having a 1 times the tower height setback for new residential lots would be appropriate, because we felt like that, when residential people are moving into those residential lots, they clearly understand that there's a tower close to them, and they kind of buy in that. Whereas an existing home, you want to make sure the tower is set back from, as a concern. So we feel like that changing the setbacks for new residential lots to be 1 times the tower height, that would be appropriate for your consideration. Severe pruning, we want to put this before you because we have experienced a great deal of severe pruning throughout town. We want to confirm that you all would still endorse that that's an important thing to not have happen to our trees, as well as provide opportunities for staff to have flexibility on whether or not we can require a replacement, or if we say, well, some trees could recover if they're severely pruned, as long as they're looked after. So we want to add some more flexibility there. We also feel like we could allow some variation in the streetscape by moving some trees around, like the ornamental trees like crepe myrtles. There may be a chance on site that they could have gaps in the streetscape to allow more visibility of signage, but yet they can move those trees elsewhere on the site. We would not lose the number of trees. It might just have an opportunity to provide some gaps in the streetscape so people can actually see wall signs or things of that sort. So we're wanting to put that before you as something we feel like that would help with reducing severe pruning. This would also, severe pruning only applies to the required landscaping on the site. Unfortunately, these are some of the worst case examples of severe pruning that we've discovered, where we've had to have people replace trees when they do that. This is another example of severe pruning. Most crepe myrtles are grow out and form, long branches, and this one has been trimmed so much that it actually is worsened the problems of visibility, because when you severe prune a crepe myrtle, it grows back more intensely, and thus you've kind of not really helped yourself. So this is kind of an example of maybe a gap in the streetscape that potentially could happen, and trees could be planted elsewhere on the site where there's not a building. So we're just providing some opportunities for visibility for businesses. With regard to group homes, there's a couple of changes here. One is screening of parking, not only group homes, but also such things as daycare homes. Sometimes when these go into an existing home, there's additional parking requirements. And we feel like that if you're going to add new parking areas to an existing home, they should be screened to help offset the impact to adjacent neighbors. And so we're making it clear of what those requirements would be, and it would be a 3-foot evergreen planting, or you could choose a fence to screen it from the adjacent property. And it would only kick in if you're adding area to the lot to provide for the parking. We're also requiring moving the group home and family care home into household living. We feel like that's more appropriate in the table of permitted uses, and making it clear that it's permitted in all residential dwellings, and it can't be prohibited by zoning conditions because of the Fair Housing Act. The next one is something you all had recommended, and the council concurred, to eliminate the maximum buffer width of 65 feet in a mixed-use overlay district. It's a simple, removing that standard, so the flexibility has been restored there. And the next set and the last set of changes would be the zoning board of adjustment. And the state general assembly adopted new revisions to the state enabling legislation or state regulations to go effect October 1st. And these are basically trying to implement what the state says you need to do. So it's not as much flexibility for you all for changes of that. Here are some of the overview of the changes. Certain changes to the notification for quasi-judicial hearings, changing the supermajority to a simple majority, 4/5 vote to a simple majority, except for variances. So for most zoning board votes, then it would be a simple majority. More availability for applying for grant variance for within the land development ordinance, so that a lot of things that maybe people couldn't apply for a variance now they will be able to. Changes to standards of how you grant a variance, what the tests and standards that must be passed, and changes to the appeals process for appeals of staff's decisions. So at the work session, we had a discussion about some of these changes. There were concerns about the impact of larger signs. There was some concerns about the cumulative impacts of signs on out parcels, and hopefully I've kind of showed an example of that through the graphics. There was concern about having signage on the base of a public art structure, and it's something that you're welcome to talk about, but we did put a provision in there to allow that to occur. There was concern about limiting illuminated window signs only to neon, so we've changed the text to make it clear, increasing the wall sign area, especially when it goes up to 2 square feet per linear frontage, that you have to have those architectural distinct segments to get that extra square footage. We also, because there were some other technologies other than neon to light the tubing for these types of signs, we make sure we change the language to update that. And we also provide you an option, if you want to go there, to allow other illuminated window signs besides neon. So you'll have to discuss that and see where you fall on that. We also clarified about the sunrooms, about building areas under a roof. Can't encroach into a building setback, as I just discussed. So staff recommends you forward this for approval around 26, but we also would need you to look at recommendations on the options to allow art on a monument sign, options to allow other illuminated types of window signs, and then options to allow those illuminated window signs, whether it's neon or other illuminated signs, to be town-wide, and then option to allow larger flags. If you wanted to reduce the number of larger flags that could be allowed, you could limit it to only those buildings that are architecturally compliant buildings. So it depends on if you feel like that, you were concerning about having those larger flags. So with that, I'll turn it over to you all to answer any questions you might have.
Ms. Best.
On the item number A on the signage, the ground signs, the example that you gave was at Crossroads where Chick-fil-A is and Pier 1. What's the determination as to how many signs can be on that road? Because I'm thinking Pier 1, you've got Pier 1, then you've got Chick-fil-A, and then you've got Olive Garden, and I think it's, I don't remember what the other one, Red Lobster or something, but they're pretty close together. So what's the distance between those?
I know we have have wording in there about 300-foot distance for signs for those entryway signs. I don't know if we have put the wording in there about out parcel signs that have to be a certain distance from each other. But that's something that we could entertain and put in here if you feel like you need some kind of distance that these signs have to be apart from each other.
And my other question on this.
Could I piggyback up on that question? Because I actually had this one loaded up. Drove along Walnut Street from Piney Plains to the highway. And I think I counted that there could possibly be 8 or 9 monument signs along that 2-block stretch, kind of like a bunch of dominoes. Because, you have the vitamin shop, you have the, whatever the new restaurant is there, you've got a Office Max, you've got, you have that many different out parcels that
Oh,
could
you're
argue.
talking
that
about
the
ground signs, right? Not
I'm talking
monuments.
about ground signs, yes.
Ground signs, okay.
And so what I'm trying to envision here is what does it look like in a 2-block section when you've got 8, 9, or maybe even 10 ground signs all stacked up like a bunch of dominoes? Do we have a concern about that?
Okay.
I mean, you end up with more signs than you end up with landscaping. Or the signs become the dominant site image that you get going down the road, as opposed to something else that we've tried to do here in Cary, which is maintain more of a natural, holistic view.
Yeah, and I think that's why staff didn't want to go to the full size of the sign, to kind of keep them smaller than a normal ground sign, so that you wouldn't get as much of an impact of those signs. But then it's all up to you all if you want a recommendation that you do not want that to occur. But
I'm sorry, I stepped on you, Ms. Best. You had
No, you're
another question?
good.
Those ground signs are only for the out parcel, is that correct? Not, for example, the way you were giving in McDonald's and the Office Max and all of those are inside.
Those are out parcels. Office Max is an out parcel, the restaurant is an out parcel, Vitamin Shop is an out parcel, NTB is an out parcel, the Taco Bell is an out parcel, the Red Lobster, I'm sorry, I did spend a little time
Maybe I'm
Well,
thinking.
up here.
I think he's thinking about Office Max is the one that was backed by REI. That was not an out parcel. Office Depot.
It is an out- oh, I'm sorry.
Office Depot is in the front.
I
and it is
apologize,
an
I
out
got-
parcel.
yeah,
So-
I got the wrong
so
name.
that may be the source of confusion.
But I think my question is, who gets first dibs? You can't not let one, if you're going to allow one to have it. So there's a particular boulevard in the area that I don't want Cary to be like, and that's what I'm thinking, that's what I'm envisioning if you have, like,
I think based on the information I just got from Rob, most of the out parcels are at least 200 feet wide. So from a spacing, they probably could meet the 300 feet separation. But again, it's up to you all.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, please.
Mr. Barker, what I'm concerned about is the increased intensity of signage from the most visible part, people driving down the street, that and the cumulative effect of increasing the wall signage as well. It seems like staff is pushing forward a massive overhaul of signage, and from my perspective, I think the signage rules that we've had in place for a long time have been adequate. We have businesses coming to our community in droves. Why are we all of a sudden, pushing for this, again, more intense signage?
Well, one of the reasons for the increase in wall sign is that we had several tenants that have approached us about increasing the wall signs. And so, like I said, we went out and looked and took this real serious about, whether or not we would support something like this, and went out and looked at it. And we felt like that, like I said, with the graphics, we feel like that the increase in wall signage on larger buildings is not going to be as big of an impact. And we feel like that we just didn't feel like that the increase that we're recommending is going to take away from the aesthetics. With regard to the ground signs, that was just something that we've just seen a lot. We're trying to create some kind of solution for the conflict with the landscaping that is required and the visibility. And we're just running into a lot of enforcement issues with a lot of people wanting to cut their trees. And so we felt like this is possibly one solution. And we also felt like, is there really a true difference between an out parcel that's a standalone somewhere else and out parcels that are in shopping centers? It's kind of like, is there really a distinct difference there?
But why does the out parcel deserve the ground sign where the other tenants, let's say in a main building of a shopping center, they don't have that advantage?
I think that might have to do with what we're doing with the monument sign to allow those monument signs to be able to display tenants within those buildings, depending on the management of the shopping center, what they want to display. So
What is the rule if an out parcel's main entrance is on the interior, okay, facing, away from the street? And what kind of signage are they allowed to put on, say, the back side of their building on the street side? Is that subtracted from their overall signage allotment for that building?
Do you want to talk about that? I'll have to defer to the people that review the signs every day.
The amount of wall signage is going to depend partly on the architecture of the building. If all four sides of the building meet design standards, you can have signs. Theoretically, you could have a sign on each side that meets those standards. In terms of looking at the sign area, we would calculate the amount of area that's allowed based on the linear frontage of the building, and then we look at that as counting towards, or the sides that you can see from any given vantage point together are looked at for meeting those area requirements. So if you're, allowed a certain square footage based on the linear frontage of the building, you could have signage on two sides of the building if it's two sides that you could see from one vantage point, and then on the opposite side, you could again have that square footage from that vantage point. So there's a number of different factors that you look at, but you would never see any more than the allowable sign area from any given spot.
Example of that could be the Lowe's on Chapel Hill Road and Maynard. On the back side they've got signage, but they also have signage on the other side as well, based on the linear footage, because you only see that one side at one time.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
I have a couple. The public art signage on the base, could you describe the rationale for that? Was there a request or an example of?
Yes, we have an existing art piece at Chatham Square with a piece of art on it, and we're just kind of setting forth that as an opportunity to keep the ground sign there. We feel like that if the art piece wasn't there, they could have a ground sign like that, as long as it was on the base and not as part of the piece of art. So we're just trying to accommodate that or put that forward.
So under the current ordinance, that sign would continue to be conforming, or it would become non-conforming?
Well, this change in the ordinance would allow it to be conforming.
And it's currently non-conforming?
Yes, it doesn't. It's something that we wouldn't be able to approve right now.
And one more question on the outdoor display and sales. It indicates that things not allowed would include hazardous and flammable materials such as gasoline, oil, antifreeze, kerosene, poisons, pesticides, and similar items. And I guess I have a question, and this just came up because of something I saw on television the other night. Would it allow fertilizer? Do we know? It's not exactly hazardous or flammable, but what I saw was that when stored outside, it is more subject to weather, is more subject to breakage. It gets out. If you're near a watershed, all of a sudden you have all the problems
I see.
we're trying to avoid, so.
Yeah, we haven't got to that level of detail with
Right.
these types of things. We can look into it and check with our fire department and see if they feel like it's an issue. We need to add that to the list.
I think I would encourage you to check with environmental departments and river keepers and those kind of people, because that's from impervious surface and having leakage you wouldn't otherwise have, that was more of a runoff kind of.
Okay, we can check on that
Issue,
and see if that's an issue for them, and we can add it if it is.
I think that's all I have for now.
Mr. Gaston.
A couple of questions. The illuminated signs, allowing other illuminated signs town-wide, that option that you put out there, is now they're currently not, is that correct?
Yes, right now, they're only allowed in the mixed-use overlay districts and the town center.
Okay, it's that, the example you had, I think it was a drugstore sign or something along
Yes.
those lines, and so those would be allowed town-wide, where currently they're not allowed at all. And if I heard you right, they're allowed on 3 sides of the building?
That's what's being proposed. Right now, they only can have one.
So from nothing to boom, 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 every store's got 1 on 3 sides?
Yeah, for a sign that's outside of the mixed-use overlay district, yes, you're
Okay.
right. Again, that's up to you all.
Well, sure, sure. And then a question on the under-roof screened-in rooms as far as encroaching on the setbacks. This is for new construction, that you can't, or if you have a deck, or if you want to enclose that deck, it can't be encroaching in the setback. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. So if somebody has a deck, like a screened-in sunroom, and it is in that 3-foot encroachment, now it becomes a non-conforming structure. Would that be correct?
We're grandfathering those as conforming structures.
Okay, so, so if my screened-in sunroom becomes grandfathered in as conforming, because I want to take that screened-in room and enclose it to conditioned space, can I do that? Or is that considered non-conforming and I'm upgrading a non-conforming structure? Because if somebody has a screened-in sunroom and they want to can build it up on the existing footprint, I want to let them do that. If this takes that away from them, I got a problem with that.
Okay. We might have to look into that and,
Because, I mean, and that's why I'm asking, does it become grandfathered or does it become non-conforming and you can't do that because now it's non-conforming, you can't expand their use?
So clarification on that point, the way the ordinance is written now, if you have the screen portion or the deck could encroach somewhat. However, the way that their ordinance is written now, the screen area can do that. But we did do an amendment a couple of years ago on this same subject where we were trying to make a clarification to distinguish between the screen and when you're actually enclosing that area and making it, in essence, a room addition.
Sure.
So the room addition cannot extend, but the screen porch could extend. One of the reasons that we're adding this piece into these amendments is to try to do some further clarification of that, because we were running into problems related to the building code. And as we're trying to clarify that, basically if it's got a roof portion, then that would not be able to encroach, so that we would avoid problems in the future where you allow a screen structure or some structure with the roof to go in, and then at some later point when somebody tries to enclose it, it becomes an enforcement difficulty, a practical thing. People can have expectations of what they can do that they couldn't do. So that's one reason we're doing this, to try to correct that.
Okay,
or
so
to make
the
some
scenario,
clarification.
so the scenario I was concerned about is already prohibited. If somebody has a screened-in, 3-foot encroaching porch,
Right.
whatever, and they want to go hire sunroom builders, to glass it up and close it, make it a really conditioned space. They
That's-
currently cannot do that.
Right, that's
Okay.
prohibited now,
'Cause
but
if
there's an
currently they could, and
enforcement.
this makes it so they can't, I didn't want that to, okay, perfect. Thank you
Exactly.
very much.
Other questions?
I want to go back to the public art base
Sure.
question here. So the rationale for allowing the signage on the base of the public art is we have a non-conforming sign, and so we need to
Well, that's
bring it into conformance, and this is one of two ways we can do that.
That's one thing, but we also thought about it too, just townwide, if somebody just wanted to, put a sign and they just so happen to want to put a piece of art on that base of that and use it as a support structure, would that be a bad thing to have public art? If the town is encouraging public art, is that an issue? Because you still have a base, and that base meets the sign ordinance from a height standpoint, from the square footage standpoint. Is there a big issue with if somebody wanted to put a piece of art there? So it's a judgment on whether or not that's something we want to do.
Right. So let me ask this question. Are we talking about commercial messages, or are we talking about any kind of signage? So, if you have a piece of public art and you want to put a label on it that says this is, the Kyoto Treaty sculpture, and you want to put the name of the person on that, is that signage considered part of this ordinance? So let's say you eliminated the use of signs on the bases, would that be eliminated also, or?
I think it's, if they're putting like the name of the thing and the
Right.
artist or whatever, it seems like that's still a commercial message promoting that artist, potentially. So I don't know, we'd have to look and see if that's,
Well, that's a different
Classified.
commercial message than somebody's name of their business.
potentially, so.
And, my concern is this a way to skirt the sign ordinance? Because if they've got their 42-inch ground sign and then they put a piece of public art, then what's to prevent them from adding their commercial message to their base of their piece of public art, giving them two signs?
Well, they couldn't substitute that for one of their ground signs. They can only have the ground sign that they're allowed. They couldn't have another ground sign if they're not allowed.
But have we clarified that in what we've written, that you may either have the 42-inch base with the message on it, or you may have the ground sign?
We'll make sure of that. We can make it clear that is a ground sign. It would be
Yeah.
counted as a ground sign.
I just disagree with the idea of putting it on the base, that the art is the art, and if you want to have a commercial message, then have a commercial
Sure.
message. But at least when you're talking about the 42-inch base of a sign, and again, it is a personal preference. I'm on the board of one of our local art organizations, and we just installed 12 pieces of public art, and
Sure.
I can't imagine having those types of signs that are commercial in nature, on bases of those. So I would be disappointed to see that in our
Okay.
ordinance.
Other questions? If not, this is maybe a little bit of a cheap shot, but I lived about 6 months of my life on a sign ordinance task force a couple of years ago, where we worked with a broad representation of interests around these issues, including citizen interests and business interests, and we came to a compromise. And what we're talking about tonight looks quite different than what that compromise looked like. And I'm wondering, how did we evolve from having a good civic engagement process where we had a whole bunch of people spend 6 months finding a compromise to something that is very different? Can you just enlighten me how that happened?
There are certain features of this proposal, particularly with the increase in the ground, principal ground sign is part of the sign task force had recommended that.
Yeah, I recognize some of the stuff
Certain things.
that we really did recommend, but I'm also seeing a bunch of stuff that we absolutely did not. And I'm just wondering how we evolved from thinking that output of that task force was really good to now saying, no, we need to do something quite different.
It was just a staff preference to provide an opportunity for adding additional ground signs, and we were recommending that through the public process to get input and also your opinion. We just, like we said, we feel like that because of the standards we put on these out parcel signs with regard to size and aesthetics, that we just kind of put that forward, and as staff can do is initiate ordinance amendments. We added that to it. But again, if you all feel like that needs more public vetting or feel like it's something that you're not comfortable with, that's up to you all. But we just put it for you for what you all think about it.
Well, I admit I should have recommended this at the work session, but I'd love to see a single chart on some of these things that lists what that citizen signed ordinance task force recommended and what we're now suggesting. Because I know I'm going to run into one of those folks at the local grocery store, and they're going to say, I thought you guys, locked us in a room for 6 months because you want to listen to us. I'd love to see that chart, or maybe the council should see that chart. Maybe that's what I'm really asking for, is let the council see what's being recommended in comparison to what their citizens said they wanted.
I think I can confidently say, and Deborah could probably interject, but the only thing I'm secure about the task force is the increase in the height of the ground signs. They're included in here. I'm not sure if there's too many other things.
I think there are a few other, but it's been 2 years. So.
I don't remember.
And I appreciate that this is bringing this up late in the process.
There was definitely an interest in the increase in the height of the ground signs because of the visibility problems. The task force was somewhat split on the increase in the wall sign area. You may recall we had a couple sign contractors who said that Cary was notoriously low in the amount of wall sign area that we allowed, and there was a strong push from the business community and from the contractors who were advisors on the task force to increase, to actually double the wall sign area, and then some of the citizens were more divided on that. So
but didn't we arrive at a compromise? Didn't we?
We were split on that.
Okay.
We were definitely split on that. And there were mixed feelings on multiple issues. So, but Ricky is correct that the ground sign height was something that the majority of the task force supported.
Yeah, the ground sign height, I remember that being something that we thought was appropriate. The out parcel monument signs, I imagine that if I was back with that group right now and I didn't say something about it, those folks would skin me alive.
There were a few people who pointed out that out parcels, that gas stations, for example, that could not have canopy signs and were having difficulty displaying the prices.
I remember that.
They were some of the examples of the commercial businesses that were asking for relief because we don't allow canopy signs. We spent a lot of time talking about canopy signage, and that maybe there might be an opportunity there, but most of the task force felt strongly not to allow that. And then there was some mixed support on the ground signs.
Is it possible to just dig up that report? I know you did a lot of work on it. Could we just dig it up and kind of do a side-by-side comparison? Maybe the council would like to see that. Because they're probably going to hear from some of their citizens anyway.
Most definitely, we could add that to the staff report as it moves forward.
And maybe you could send that out to us
I
as well,
will.
just for
I will do
information
that, too.
purposes. I also wanted to talk about the whole question of neon versus other technology signs. Neon is not a state-of-the-art technology, and Cary is a state-of-the-art community, so I want to make absolutely certain we don't lock ourselves into just neon when we have, you know, fiber optics and diodes and everything else that are doing so much better job, more environmentally conscious, more energy efficient, and much more aesthetically attractive. So I'm going to be hoping we get that in a motion.
I'm pretty sure that was changed, the definition here has been changed to incorporate that.
Well, I think we said that we could interject that if we wanted to.
That was one of the,
That was one of the options.
It was an option. There's, within the draft text, there's some boxes with option A and option B.
Okay.
And I believe it's the option A that includes the, if you adopt all of the option A boxes, then that would, rather than referring to neon, that makes the shift to illuminated window signs. And we did keep the provision within that they would not be blinking or flashing, it would be static. But if you wish to go that way in your recommendation, if you adopt that option, then that is what that would effectuate.
And just taking it to the next degree, could you use a flat panel monitor?
Pardon?
The illuminated box signs basically just convey a message, right? They just put a transparency in front of some light, right? Well, could you get the same effect by just using a monitor, a TV? Think of a TV screen. Think of a nice LCD.
I think one of the things that we were trying to word that to avoid, to try to avoid the technologies that are inherently changeable in nature, because there is such an enforcement issue with that as well. So we did, want to provide some flexibility, but again, trying to stay away from the lights that could be installed and then easily be blinking or flashing.
I'm with you on the
those
blinking and
kinds of
flashing. I
lights.
don't think we need that.
Or the
but
scrolling and.
I think we're getting a legal opinion.
Well, we would continue to prohibit digital signs, which I'm thinking that might veer into the realm of a digital sign, as well as the electronic changeable message. Anything intermittent or flashing are also already prohibited, but that sounds like a digital sign that's prohibited. So the definition we'd be looking at is an illuminated sign. So a sign with illumination behind it in some way, but not where the whole thing is a digital piece. That's prohibited.
I expect we'll come back and revisit that, but I got it. Can I ask a question about tower setbacks?
Sure.
Remember, again, this is a liability of having been around here for a while. Remember, we had some tower discussions quite some time ago, and the reason we had the 1 times the tower height, or 1.5 times the tower height setback is if one of these things cantilevered at the bottom and fell, it's going to destroy something. It basically bounces. The damage from a falling tower bounces. And that, I think it was a 1.5 times the tower height was our standard. Do we somehow believe that that's no longer a concern? We no longer have a risk there?
Based on our discussion with the people that were on our technology, on the tower, we did a tower task force, I guess a telecommunication task force, and they're basically saying that the towers are designed to collapse down and not over.
So do we have something in this provision that says if your tower is one of the ones that's designed to collapse down,
I don't know,
okay,
we most definitely can check into that, because that's not, of course, our intention to cause any safety issues.
Yeah, here's my concern. We change this ordinance, and then we have an old legacy tower, and it just decides to scissor straight down, and all of a sudden, we look pretty bad. So I think we probably need to say, yeah, if it's a tower that isn't going to cause damage because of the way it's constructed, fine, but if it's a legacy tower, that has the same problem that caused us to have the 1.5 times in the first place.
I see. So we need some kind of certification from someone before they can allow that setback to occur.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, then I think I've had my tantrum now. Any other questions?
I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Take a stab. And I'm just going to make a motion on item A. And that is the sign changes. But I recommend that we forward it to council with a recommendation for approval with the following exceptions. The articles related to neon, and if somebody wants to come back behind me and change the exceptions or whatever, I guess we can do it that way. But for neon, 9A 3.2B, the table, 9A 3.1, I'm sorry, 9A 1.2, to remove any change to that, so there is no expansion of neon to 3 sides, and there is no expansion of neon outside the existing areas where it's allowed. So that's one exception.
Can you go through that one more time, because I'm not sure I understand what you just
Yeah,
said.
so basically, there are 3 things I'm going to take out of my recommendation. So it's everything except, I'm going to talk about neon.
If we looked at the summary, it would be everything
Yeah,
except the
it would be
illuminated window
everything
signs,
Except
without getting into the actual
Yep.
sections. Yep, I'm with you.
the neon and illuminated window sign section, the public art section, and leaving in the ordinance the restrictions on ground signs in out parcels. So no change to the out parcel ground sign, no change to the art, so we continue to have a non-conforming sign right now, and then no change to the neon.
So you delete,
Except that the neon verbiage should reflect
State of
that
the
it may not be a neon gas.
Yeah,
It may
okay.
be some kind of, which I think we've already got in there, as like LEDs or neon appearing is fine, but not, it doesn't have to be neon gas, which I think we had
Understand.
that discussion a couple years ago.
so you're
But you
not,
do want to leave the size restricted to 2 rather than 4 square foot, right?
can I add,
Yes.
can I add
Yes.
something just for factual information? Most of the neon signs out there are at least 3.5 square
Right,
feet.
That was the reason for that.
And so that's the issue, is that
You can't
if-
buy one.
if,
So that's fine, yeah, change that
For-
size.
So just
Change the size.
change
but
the size.
Still only one, still only in the areas where it's currently
okay,
allowed.
thank you.
And I can talk to you later about some blinking neon signs I'd love to see gone
Yes,
from different parts.
we put a hold on enforcing that until we got through this.
Okay,
When this gets through, most
I'll
definitely.
second that motion.
Did everybody have a clear understanding what we're talking about now?
I think so. I just want to, so no expansion of lighted neon or neon-like signs, just where they're allowed today.
right, except
We
the
acknowledge,
size.
we acknowledge the fact that the size is what the size is, but not in other places of town, and no more than one. I like that. The art one, just to clarify, is not the question about art on top of a sign, it's the public art base.
It is
no
not
sign.
the monument sign reference,
Right.
it is the art base.
Right.
Should not have a message on it.
Right. And ground signs would stay the same. Yeah. Those are actually the ones I had
Yeah.
concerns about also, so.
So ground signs stay the same, they don't increase in size?
No, the increase to ground signs that is referenced is okay.
Okay.
The addition of out parcel ground signs is not
Perfect.
included in this recommendation.
I do understand. Thank you.
So so this is going to cover all the signage, this motion? Mm-hmm. So,
Except for those 3. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I
Are
was
there
just try-
other things
I
you
was just
guys
trying to
need from
figure out
us?
the option about allowing art on top of the monument sign. I didn't know if y'all had any opinion about if you wanted to allow that to occur.
In my motion, I allow it to occur.
Okay. Up to the
Wait a
option,
second.
based
I
based
just
on the
misunderstood you
option.
then.
Yes.
There's 2 different references to art. in this set of ordinances. One is when you have a monument sign, you can have up to 25%
Yes.
allowed as art that is
Logo.
local to it. So that would be acceptable under what I'm recommending. And then where you have a piece of public art that has a 42-inch base, and the primary function of that is not an entry monument, it is a piece of art, you are not allowed to have a commercial message on that sign. I mean, on that base.
Other questions? Do we have,
Second.
okay, we have a motion and a second.
I just wanted to comment. Thank you for the motion. That was very difficult. But I do have to say I'm going to support it because the neon lights, expansion to 3 sides at 4 feet, I mean, that's just going from nothing citywide to an explosion citywide. You know, if there was a baby step of possibly 1 4-foot sign per building, I could possibly agree with that, but this was just an explosion, so I agree with that. The art should be art. Art should not be a shill for some business, so I agree with that. And the ground signs and the out parcels I agree with. So, yeah, thank you for putting together a very good motion.
Other comments?
I'll basically second what Bill said, other than I'll say a little bit more on the neon or lighted. I don't think, I agree that this would be too much. I think anything is too much. I've heard from many citizens who don't like the fact that we have the neon lighted signs that we do, and so I don't think it should be expanded at all. But I agree with your other comments. Art should be art, and I think the ground signs for out parcels, the idea is right, but there needs to be some way of sharing or something based on what Mr. Swanstrom pointed out. So yeah, I think you hit the right ones. Thank you.
No, I agree with everything in the motion. The most troubling part of what was being recommended was the ground signs for the out parcels. I adamantly disagree with that. I think the intensity of signage on our roadways would be too great by doing that, and the elimination or keeping it the way it is now is fair.
Okay. So we have a motion. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye. Aye. Opposed? That motion carries 7-0. Okay, now we need to,
Well, there was one more. It was the larger flags, and I think Mr. Barker was looking for a recommendation on larger flags for item A2. We can do that separately, right?
Yeah, you can do that separately.
I
about the
guess we
flags.
will do it separately. So do you have a do you have
Well,
something?
it was, I mean, it was included in your motion.
It would have been allowed for.
Right,
in
there was an
my motion,
option
because I
of
didn't take it
architecturally
out.
compliant buildings or not, so.
So are you satisfied with what we voted on, or do you want to have a separate?
No, I think it's fine.
Do you need anything else from us?
So you're basically not putting that standard about architecturally compliant
That's my
building.
understanding, right, is that it would allow larger flags
Doesn't matter if you have a
in
building.
general, right?
Yep.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, I wanted to clarify that, thank you.
Okay, now we need to go to item B.
That was the hard one. I'll try item B since I did bring up an item. I recommend that we forward LDO amendment for round 26. Item B, outdoor display of sales and goods to town council with a recommendation for approval, as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all of our applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation, with a recommendation that staff look into fertilizers and similar other things that could be potentially pollutants but not hazardous, and make a determination on whether those should be allowed for outdoor sales.
We have a motion, do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. No discussion at all? In that case, I'm going to call it to a vote. All those in favor of the motion as stated, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries 7-0. And you did get the note about
I did.
providing input on the fertilizer, please.
I will do that.
Okay, now we have to drop down to, I believe it's item number C, which is sunrooms. If we don't have any questions, does anyone have a motion here?
Move that the board forward LDO amendment, we got
26.
26, item C, sunrooms and screen porches to town council with a recommendation for approval as it is consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and is reasonable and in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, that motion carries unanimously. We will drop down to item D, setbacks from telecommunications facilities. And usually I don't make motions, but I'm going to make a motion here that I'm going to recommend we forward this, or recommend that we table this item to do some additional research on the engineering nature of the risk of various different telecommunication facilities to ensure that we don't create a undesirable hazard.
Second.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to abstain because I'm in this business, telecommunication tower business, so I will abstain from voting.
I think we need to make a motion to recuse you.
I think we need to make a motion to recuse you, which means that we're going to table, or we're going to set aside the motion that I just made, and we're going to, someone's got to make a motion to recuse.
I move to
We're
recuse.
tabling the motion, the recusal is not relevant, may or may not be relevant.
Well, I think she has a right to be recused from the discussion. And since we're discussing it at all, I think I don't see any objection from our attorney, so I think maybe, yeah, let's recuse. Okay, so would someone make a motion to recuse?
I move to recuse Ms. Best from our discussion of telecommunication.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Bad news is you have to leave the room now.
Okay.
But we will bring you back.
Just leave the table. You can, yeah, she's allowed to go.
Oh, okay. Okay, now, we have I think my motion is still pending, right? And your second is still pending? Discussion?
Yes, I just have a question. Is there any need, any question that has come up, any requirement, the impact of delaying this amendment?
No.
All right.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, in that case, I'll call the motion. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, so we've moved to, and I think,
Do we have to make another motion
we
to
need a
bring her
motion?
back? Or?
no,
No.
I have a question, Mr. Chair, before you go on.
yes.
I'm wondering, and this is fine, if we can do items E, F, G, and H together if people have issues with any of them. If not,
I agree with that concept.
I will make one for all of them.
I'm
and
really
I'm not-
happy with that.
Okay. Since we have to read this lovely text every time. I move that we forward LDO amendments round 26, items E, severe pruning, item F, group homes, item G, mixed-use overlay district development standards, and item H, zoning board of adjustment and special use hearings to town council with a recommendation for approval as they are consistent with the comprehensive plan and all other applicable plans and reasonable in the public interest for the reasons set forth in the staff report and presentation.
Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second?
I have a question. The group homes requirement, and I should have brought this up earlier, I noticed that we had one slide that said this was going to apply to daycare homes now. Would this generally apply to all daycare homes such that they have to go back and add fences and landscaping to existing daycare homes, or would it only be new daycare homes? And would it be only where there are additional parking spaces added?
That's right.
Okay.
It'd be only for new ones that would come in after this ordinance is adopted to make sure when they come in, and if they're expanding, needing to expand their parking area, then that's when that would kick in. But if they got enough parking on site to accommodate the requirement, then they wouldn't need to screen it.
How much parking is required for, I think, a a daycare home typically has about 7 kids are allowed to 1 caretaker, 5 to 7. How much is that small amount required to have additional parking added? What's the threshold there?
There is a parking requirement. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me right now. We can look it up, but
Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and support the motion, but I would just say that that little piece may need some exploring to see if the average, single mom watching 4 kids, 3 or 4 kids for a neighbor is going to end up having this landscaping and fencing and have to meet all these requirements. That may be burdensome.
yeah, we just, the reason we added daycare, home daycare, is because we want it to be consistent, with any kind of use that's going to require additional parking, because the impact is still going to be the same, whether it's a group home or daycare. If you're going to add additional parking on the adjacent neighbor, we didn't want to treat the 2 uses differently.
Well, group homes and daycare homes are different, so, that's...
I was just going to give you the parking information. A small daycare home would be 3 parking spaces per home plus 1 additional parking space if there's an employee who does not reside at the home. And a large daycare home, which would require a parcel of land to be 12,000 square feet or greater, would be 4 parking spaces per home plus 1 space if there's an employee. And you can only have 1 employee who's not a resident of the home if it's a large daycare home.
So most likely it'd be large daycare homes because most single families have enough room to accommodate the small daycare.
3 parking spaces? Okay.
Are you okay with just the clarification? I'd be happy to remove that item if you want to consider it.
No,
separately.
no, I just, as long as
it's noted, okay.
Yeah, as long as that piece is explored further.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other discussion? In that case, we'll call that motion. All those in favor of the motion as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion carries unanimously. And then just an item of note, I will be away on vacation next month, so Ms. Muir will be running your meeting, and I'm sincerely hoping she isn't orders of magnitude more efficient than I am. It would be embarrassing.
I'm sure that's not the case.
And the other note I wanted to just bring up is we will have an event at the end of September that is sort of a meeting of all the different boards and commissions, and one of the things we were told to do is present a report of our activities for the year. You may recall Mr. Miller had such a brilliant idea last time.
It was a team effort.
Since I'm going to be gone for a bit here, I wanted to give you all a chance to get creative juices flowing again. This year's model is going to be a speed dating model, where evidently I'm going to have to date a bunch of people, which I haven't told my wife about yet. And so any thoughts you have on how we can bring some levity and humor that does not involve any musical talent, I would appreciate it.
Like costumes, can we,
Yeah, I was just
can
going
we
to ask about
costume you?
wardrobe.
For your speed dating event?
I remember, I have a long memory and I will get even. With that said, I think that concludes our business. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Take a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion second?
Second.
We have a motion second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Excellent.
This has been a production of Cary TV. Visit the Town of Cary's website at townofcary.org.